Hello, hello. Welcome to the episode of the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. I am your host, Neil Horowitz. Hit me up on Twitter, NJH287, also on LinkedIn, the website, dsmsports.net, also Slyke, SLYKE.co. And of course, you can follow the podcast on whichever podcast platform is your favorite. And we have a podcast-related episode for you guys today. This is such a good episode. I was able to talk to Kevin Jones, founder and CEO of Blue Wire. Blue Wire Sports, Blue Wire Podcasts are basically a podcasting network. If you're familiar with like Wondery or The Volume or even Barstool has, a podcast network. These organizations that support several podcasts, put them all together, helps with sales, helps with infrastructure and operation. Blue Wire does it for sports. They work with a ton of sports podcasts out there. You'll hear Kevin talk about some of the stats that they have, some of the stars that are using their platform. They recently brought in Cam Newton to do a podcast. They have a ton of podcasts throughout several different sports, including professional wrestling. And really, it's really cool to think about the idea of podcasts. They continue to grow, they continue to become more versatile as well. We talk about what a podcast even means now in 2024. And the idea that certainly that a podcast is something that is not platform specific. It's very agnostic. There's few things that you can take with you to other platforms. If Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, all these platforms were to shut down tomorrow, you still have your podcast. You have all it is basically is an RSS feed. It's an XML file that you can take with you. And this podcast itself, the Digital Social Media Sports Podcast, you can find on tons of platforms, many of which I don't even know about because people can take that RSS feed and put it elsewhere. There are very few things like that. Think about the things that identify us as individual users: email, phone number. We didn't even talk about the idea of growing, Blue Wire into an email platform as well, kind of like Substack or Beehive or whatnot. That's a whole other thing. There are so many things that we didn't get time to talk about, but we talked about a ton of good stuff. So here he is, Kevin Jones, founder and CEO of Blue Wire. You're going to enjoy this one. I'm back on the podcast with today's guest, and I'm so psyched to talk to him. We also discover we have an interesting intersection with our past as well with internships. We're going to learn a ton today with my guest, Kevin Jones, founder and CEO of Blue Wire Sports. And welcome to the podcast today, Kevin.
Neil, thanks so much for having me, man. I've been noticing your show a lot. You're getting some great interviews, so hopefully we'll have a great conversation here for the listeners.
Hell yeah. We have a high bar here, but you're going to kick ass, and you have such an interesting opportunity there with what you're doing with Blue Wire over the years, really growing this thing into a big organization with tons of talent, tons of shows, and I'm psyched to learn all about what you guys are doing there. But before we get into the meat of our discussion, Kevin, tell us about you. Tell us about your career path, your stops along the way, developing your skills, starting Blue Wire, and any tips for folks that kind of want to try to do what you do.
My dream always was to be a beat reporter, radio host. And I went out and did that dream for 8 years as my first step in media. Mm-hmm. Worked in Cleveland, covering the Browns for clevelandbrowns.com for the team. Worked in DC at a TV station where I was doing some on-air stuff, and then ultimately worked in radio and KMBR. So my career path, the first half of it was interviewing players, writing articles, doing radio hits. That was literally my dream since I was 7, 8, 9 years old. So I went out and did that. I started really getting the itch for the sports business side, but I didn't want to start all the way at the bottom of the totem pole. So I founded Blue Wire 6 years ago, just thinking that there can be more competition in the podcast space in terms of publishers helping sports creators get going. I had a podcast. I was really enthusiastic about podcasting. I thought it could be a lot bigger when it was in 2018, years later. I really wanted to help sports podcasters make more money, make great content, and bring a network together. It's really hard doing it by yourself. How can you be a part of a network and maybe see some advantages to that? So my background definitely informed me. Like, working at radio was not the dream job I had hoped. The culture wasn't great at the radio station. The opportunities, you really had to have been there for 20, 30 years to really even be on air. So I just gravitated towards podcasting. It's been a huge chapter in my career, building Blue Wire, the business. And I'm glad I got to live out my dream, interviewing KD and Clay and Steph Curry. I was there when Colin Kaepernick took a knee.
Oh, wow.
I was there for Bryce Harper's first game. I saw RG3's rookie season. And I made some friends in the agent world and the athlete world along the way that I'm still in contact with a lot of those people.
Love it. Yeah, we're going to learn all about how you feel about the podcast space and Blue Wire, but I kind of like the idea of like your content, your early understanding of content principles and fan engagement in general and fan consumption patterns. Like as you were coming up, at a very interesting time as stuff was evolving from sort of maybe the old school way of doing things to this newer way with direct connections to fans. And when something that's something that may felt like stray content in the past, all of a sudden could take off and go viral on social media. It's like when you were thinking about coming up in that content space, were you just kind of focusing on what the traditional stuff was, X and O's, and how did you start to learn what was working, what wasn't working, and how did you start to sort of evolve your understanding of what it meant to be a content producer in sports, and use that term broadly as intentionally?
For sure. So I mentioned my previous jobs. I was always in charge or contributing to web traffic. So I knew web traffic really well, but that started to kind of die down in the Facebook when that peaked in 2016, 2017. I'm wearing Apple AirPods right now. I think they helped really change the game in terms of consumption. It made people want to listen more, or because we're so glued to our phones, like listening. And I think sports is so valuable, but the pregame shows or Sports Center, they'll always be there, but I don't think they're exciting for people to watch. People are gravitating towards personalities right now, to answer your question right on the head. And kind of what I identified after working in media for a long time is like, it doesn't really matter about your brand as the radio station. It matters much more about who the personalities are representing your brand. Are they engaging? Are they good at digital? You can't just have a podcast. You've got to be getting likes and retweets on X. I don't know how to say re-X's, so I still call it Twitter there. But you have people building their own media empires right now. They're not massive media empires that are worth $1 billion, but creators in all different kinds of subjects, and sports especially. So I thought those people are really creating high engagement. Traffic is leaving websites, eyeballs are leaving the sports centers, the cords are cutting, so I think we're in this personality driven era right now for sports podcasters, whether it's Pat McAfee, whether it's, you have all these athlete podcasters who I'm working with, Jake Paul, Logan Paul, Cam Newton. People are picking their favorite personalities. People are picking their favorite topics, the Warriors, the Yankees. And instead of following the beat reporter, they're following the favorite Warriors podcaster, because Sam and Andy, they trend on Twitter. Scott and Andrew, the Yankees podcasters, they're delivering the fan perspective. A lot of the beat reporters don't say their true feelings. So I think people want to see people's personalities. They can get their news anywhere in an instant. Like, what doesn't have to be a hot take, but what is, like you said, is it X's and O's? Are they sarcastic? Are they predicting different trades that are going to happen? Our wrestling guy, Chris Van Vliet, he flies and interviews Rey Mysterio Jr. and Undertaker. Like, what is your separator? How is the personality driven? How are you getting a digital engagement? Everyone's doing it a little bit differently, but that's what I saw. That's what I thought I could group together, are these pockets of really interesting people producing sports engagement. Let's put it on one team. Let's measure it all together. This engagement is really special.
Yeah, there's, I mean, a few really big themes there that came out that I think you're spot on with. I mean, I think early on too, even just thinking about when you are producing content as a beat reporter, as a team site editor, whatever it might be, it's like we have this storyline or this observation at practice or whatever it is, or this thing that someone said, and it's like all the different ways that can beget content. It might turn into a tweet. It might turn into a podcast segment. It might turn into a radio interview. It might turn into a written story. There's all these different ways that you can slice and dice ultimately the same storyline. So that's one area, but I want to dive into a little more the fan side too, because I've come up with on this podcast before in the past, and I kind of circle like a little bit of that sort of Bill Simmons era early on of like, okay, there's information, but then there's information with a personality. And it's like, okay, when something breaks, you might learn about it from Woj, you might learn about it from Schefter, but like then it's like, okay, I'm gonna go hear what this person has to say about it. Even
exactly
the original information. I think that's like a super key insight. So when that story started to hit you, did you even feel it yourself when you were on the reporter front of like, hey, I can information is becoming more of a commodity, and I need a different way to break through?
Exactly. I was at the radio station. They were like, go write articles about what's happening at practice. And it's like, I don't think people really care about exactly what's happening. They want to know what I think's going to happen next after watching the practice, or finding their own unique angle. I'll keep going back to our Warriors podcasters. Sam and Andy with their show called Light Years. They were the first podcast I added to the network back when I founded Blue Wire. And I had that aha observation watching them as I was actually at the game in front of Steph Curry talking to him. They were getting way more retweets, way more likes. And so I think fans are actually relating to other fans now of the game. Like you said about the Bill Simmons angle, people have taken that to the local level and they're more snarky about the team. They don't have all these sources who they're going to piss off. They don't have to face the team every day. They're kind of doing this from their own home. So they're, when you don't have to look at someone every day, you will say a little bit more when you want to. And I think that's where we're replacing talk radio a little bit at Blue Wire. That old vibe of after a tough loss, you could listen to a sports radio show in the early 2000s, and there was elation, or after a big win, after a loss, people were really upset and they could vent. A lot of our guys go live after a game now on YouTube, and people are leaving comments and they're reacting live to the comments. So I think the content is kind of similar from what it was 20 years ago, but the way we're delivering it is so much more different. And the people who get to be involved, there used to be 3 radio chairs an hour. Now the cream rises to the top. Who's interesting, entertaining, really good at digital, they're going to have the biggest audiences. So yeah, keep thinking of our Warrior show as they were on the early edge of changing things. And now you have Cam Newton, now you have Jake Paul and Logan Paul building their own. Logan Paul doesn't appear on any other podcast. He just does his own. A lot of people are like, why am I going on all these shows? Let me just have my own platform here, make money on it. I think that's kind of the future. Blending. Cam Newton used to appear on the radio show. Now he has his own podcast. You got to blend the athletes where they used to appear. They have their own channel. And the fans are kind of taking over for the radio hosts. So totally. Kind of blending both of those worlds together, Blue Wire. And not many people are doing local and national together. That's been our sweet spot, doing both.
Yeah. I even think about it in like the endorsement angle of like, I can endorse a product as an athlete, or I can create my own product and own it myself. And there's a nice little like kind of a juxtaposition there, a similar idea. I want to take a step back to just to set the frame for any listeners who aren't as familiar with Blue Wire and or podcasts in general. I guess first off, I'm going to ask a very like deeper or big picture question. I guess when you hear the word podcast, and maybe it differs today versus when you first started Blue Wire, how do you define a podcast? And then give our listeners an idea of like just what the overview of Blue Wire is. Athlete driven podcast, fans. You mentioned a little bit already, but I wanted to give you a chance to really describe so we have that perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I think of a podcast actually as a podcaster, and this podcast is audio only, but a lot of podcasts are now becoming video first. A podcast is a show. And so the podcaster is the star of the show. They have their own topic that they talk about. They have their own release cadence. And so I think of these as mini shows. Outside of First Take, there's not a lot of shows on ESPN Sports Center. Like, that world's getting disrupted. Cable TV, cable news. People are, instead of tuning into that stuff, they're picking their favorite personalities, their favorite podcasters, and consuming their content. I follow hundreds of different podcasts, actually, but just their clips of the show. So I think that's another way to be a podcast consumer. You can have favorite podcasters that you don't even listen to the full thing regularly, but you're following what they're doing. Some of their hot takes, when they go viral. So I think it's this whole ecosystem that people are paying attention to. Yes, everyone has their favorite couple of shows that they tune into regularly, but I think more and more people have 10, 20, 100 shows that they're paying attention to because the podcaster is interesting. There's now clips of it all everywhere. And it's this whole media ecosystem, especially when you're talking about the YouTubers, like traditional media personalities, they're not making a lot of new ones anymore. They're all YouTubers now. They're all up and coming podcasters or athletes. Yes, there's some people from local news who break out and go to Good Morning America or whatever, but the number one job for a 9-year-old in the country right now is to become a YouTuber. There's something special happening on that platform specifically, combined with podcasts and social media. It's just a whole new ecosystem and a way to consume stuff. So a podcast to me is a show. The podcaster are new digital creators, and people are paying a lot more attention to this part of the media ecosystem.
Hell yeah. And quick, I want to dive into that, of course, and double click a ton. Give us just a quick overview of what Blue Wire is, who you cater to, what kind of podcasters people would find there.
Definitely. So my insight when I first founded the company is that podcasting was built at the beginning for Joe Rogan, Guy Raz,
Hmm.
some of these really big shows, just the 1%. I thought there could be a sports specific network and maybe bigger than sports one day, but so far it's just been sports and culture where we're looking outside the top 1% of shows. We help podcasters make more money. It's very simple to it. We take over the ad sales for them. We become their business partner. We give them content strategies on how to grow their audience. We have 250 different podcasts on Blue Wire,
Wow.
reaching about 13 million monthly downloads worldwide. We're roughly like the 17th or 18th largest podcast network in the game. There's definitely bigger ones than us. Our competition is iHeart and SiriusXM and Cumulus and Barstool and The Volume with Colin Cowherd is a new one the last couple of years. You have Dan Le Batard's network. There's fierce competition, but at the end of the day, our brand is more about the creators. We don't have one person like a Bill Simmons leading the way on the content side. We have a portfolio of content. We have a Mount Rushmore of different shows that we champion. And so we're built kind of from the bottom up. We started with just one show, my podcast, in 2018, and now are one of the biggest networks in the game. So,
Hell yeah.
it's been awesome having these big names choose us, but we are for the common fan too. We like you to have 25,000 downloads per episode, or not per episode, 25,000 downloads per month as a bare minimum to work with Blue Wire. So unfortunately, we do turn a lot of people down who we'd love to work with, but we're really focused on that mid to upper size podcaster in sports and culture, and how do we become their business partner?
Awesome. Thanks for that. And when you look at, I mean, you mentioned the 25,000 download to be something of a threshold there, but when you look at a podcaster who is developing, something of a track record and an audience, like I guess a little bit of like what tends to come first? Is it that I'm building an audience on my platforms, whether that's through Instagram or TikTok, I'm making my own commentary, and then it's like, hey, you have an opportunity to turn this into a recurring show with an operation or background, or vice versa, where it starts with a podcast first, like I did originally, and then it begets clips, and I become sort of a social media influencer, so to speak, and creator by virtue of having that podcast first.
You did it the hard way. We definitely prefer the other way, where they're already making content, at least on one social platform.
Mm-hmm.
For sports, preferably X. That's a pretty good indicator. If you have a big X following and it's engaged, that has good headwinds, or excuse me, tailwinds for us, where we think you can build an audience. That being said, though, like there's some people who start with the podcast first. The podcast is what the digital creator should be gravitating towards. We let our creators own their IP. They cannot own their Twitter audience. They cannot own their YouTube audiences.
Right.
Who knows? I don't think 10 years from now those platforms go away, but if they do, you lose everything, or they make a change, or you say we don't really work with creators who are pushing the envelope, but those who do can get censored or blocked. The podcast is something that you do own. It's an RSS feed. There's phones actually subscribe to your content. They get delivered the content. And again, that's an open ecosystem, a podcast. So we encourage creators definitely build up on the platforms, pick 2 or 3, particularly X and YouTube, where you really are making moves. For yours, it's more LinkedIn. If you're more of a business podcast, it just depends what platform that you're pushing the needle on. But your way, we've seen people do it for sure. You got to be talking to someone at the end of the day, right? The podcast is the megaphone, but is there anyone listening to it, right? You got to
Totally.
There's got to be people in the stands. Think of it as a mini stadium. If 7,000 people are listening to your podcast, think of you're at a concert. That's a lot of people, 7,000 people. And, we want to work with people who are selling out a NASCAR stadium with 100,000 people per episode. So, we really want people who are very active on social media. It's their job is to also not just the podcast, but build an audience day to day.
Yeah, because you're constantly trying to attract new audience and getting people to sample, I guess and let's kind of dive into that a little bit. Because probably, I mean, I'm not going to try to even ballpark any estimates, but I'm sure a higher percentage of people are encountering podcasts through clips on TikTok, Reels, Shorts, etc., than they are, encountering them on through a traditional podcast experience, whether that's, watching a full episode on YouTube or listening on their preferred podcast app or whatever. So are you guys thinking in terms of helping to optimize that sort of, if for lack of a term, like a funnel? Like we're gonna get our clips out to a huge audience of millions, and the goal is to convert some of that audience to our longtime listeners. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of that in social media in general. Of we're seeing growth in Instagram broadcast channels and WhatsApp channels to go from that larger ecosystem to a more intimate one-to-one relationship. And how are you guys seeing that play out from that conversion from a someone that sees our content to someone that becomes a regular listener or subscriber?
The tools are still very elementary for just how to, in podcasting in general, for how to get awareness. I think Shorts and Reels really help, being a TikTok copycat. So like that's a really good discovery tool. Mm-hmm. Blue Wire has a $13 million audience per month. We combine everyone's audiences to do that. We think we're one of the few brands that are really focused on our creators' brands. We're less focused on the Blue Wire brand, mm-hmm. but we check in quarterly with every podcaster, let them know, here's what's working in your content strategy. Here's what other people are doing that's working for them. Maybe you want to adopt this into your strategy. Yeah. So I think clips have definitely changed the game for podcasting. That's made discovery a lot easier. And now, yeah, it is about converting folks. Ultimately, you have to be interested in that topic, though, and that's why the podcast CPMs are higher than a website CPM or a YouTube CPM. What advertisers buy podcasting for are $25 or even bigger for the celebrities per 1,000. That's the hardest thing to get, is someone's attention for 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes here. So that's where we really believe in the platform. People are spending as much time with our podcasters as they are maybe their favorite Netflix show or their favorite streaming platforms per week, right? You're watching one or two, or some people are watching a lot more shows per week. But I think there's high value when you do convert someone, and the advertisers are paying for the higher value there. But we're more and more including clips on our advertising packages too, that the advertisers are understanding, hey, this is a full enchilada. This is a full ecosystem. I can be reaching even more people on clips who aren't listening to the podcast yet. Yeah. So I think we've done a good job utilizing that in sales. I think the industry is catching up to how the podcast is, like I said, the podcaster and all the content they're putting out. So we're focusing more on a sales perspective than actually helping build a centralized audience. We're helping our creators, and monetizing these clips is our focus.
And for a creative perspective, like are they thinking top of mind when they are looking at the performance after a given month or week or whatever time period you want to use? Are they looking at, okay, we're reaching this many people and we're getting this many listens to our podcast, or we're trying to grow subscribers? Like, is there that thing in the back of their minds where like, okay, we need to have a CTA, we need to try to like, the goal here is ultimately to, yes, reach as many people as we can, but still want to get them through that sort of ultimate KPI, the ultimate conversion being that subscriber? Yeah,
definitely. I think you hear it on most YouTube subscribe button. Like comment, subscribe, people animate that button. So like that is a big part of it. But it's also how I keep mentioning X as a platform for sports. You got to be more than just promoting your own content. You got to be providing commentary for free that they're getting. People generally want to hear from you more than just the podcast. X allows your Instagram, what am I saying? The stories on Instagram allow you to, I think you got to be interesting at the end of the day. And like, you got to be using all the platforms, and not, if you're just promoting your content, it's not going to work. Gary Vee, and he's one of many people who are experts on this, but you give a lot away for free. Yeah. And then, that'll get them to your podcast. That's where you can charge advertisers a lot more money. You're probably not making a lot on your X account, but it's getting people excited there to then listen to your podcast.
Yeah, a little bit of that jab, right hook. And I think it's really just that repeat exposure too. I think these days, and you're starting to see a little more now, where the going viral on TikTok with a single TikTok, for example, like isn't really that the golden meal ticket that maybe people wanted to be at one time. Like you have to really find a way to how can I continue to reach an audience and how can I do this again and again and again. And if you get them to hit that subscribe button or develop, and also too, I think something that you've been getting at as well, which I am a strong believer in, is when you have someone in your ear or you're watching on YouTube, whatever, for hours at a time or hours per week or per month, like that parasocial relationship is it's freaking real. Like, and you meet you like you feel like you're friends with the podcasters, and that makes you really a great recipient for ad reads and brand affiliation, and also just someone that is going to continue to want their content, and not just stumble upon it by serendipity on TikTok.
That relationship is what I really believe in is the biggest thing about this industry. It goes beyond just consuming content. There is some kind of connection that's developed when you're consuming someone for hours, when you're putting someone into your brain like this with the headphones. When the trends are people 35 and under are watching more YouTube at night than cable television, and streaming's up there too. But people are, we used to not be able to choose, Neil, what we were going to watch at night. 15 years ago, it was what it was. There was no streaming. It was just cable, basically. Mm-hmm. Now they choose their own content, choose their own adventure. They discover so many niche topics that they want to hear more about and more in-depthly. So, and then they connect with someone and they totally get it. They're like, I get podcasting now. I get why people like it. I get why people do it. And more great creators are coming to space. Legacy shows are still popular. And that connection, parasocial friendship that you develop, like you said, it's not coming through a TV screen for the most part, or it takes a lot longer of a time there. We have a survey that says folks love their favorite, a bunch of people were surveyed 35 and under. 86% like their favorite podcaster more than their favorite musician or actor.
Wow.
It's, that's one poll. It's not everyone ever, but there's something happening here. This is a true revolution. We don't even understand it, but I think 10, 15 years from now, content is going to continue to look different. The president of the United States one day may have a podcast like FDR got on the radio. It's just a way to connect with people at such a better level.
Yeah, I love hearing that. That's a really cool thing to hear. I want to touch briefly too on sort of you launched Blue Wire, I think it was 2019, and then not too long after we were all stuck at home with nothing to do, and granted very little sports on as well. But what did the pandemic look like for Blue Wire? And I think podcasts did. I think anything that was sort of online and allowed you to feel like you were not alone kind of rose up a little bit during that period. So what were the sort of the trends that you guys saw play out, and how has that behavior either stayed continued or maybe evolved as we come out of the pandemic?
We focused a lot on clips and YouTube. That's kind of been the biggest change, so I won't harp there. But that we didn't see it coming to the degree that it is now. We've definitely changed our game plan to cater a lot more to YouTube, as the advertisers really believe in it. One thing we got wrong I can talk about is we thought narrative content was going to be a lot more popular in the sports genre. Mm-hmm. So we made a couple of narrative scripted shows that sound more like you're watching a documentary or listening to a documentary. Stories about Freddie Adu and from Grant Wall, rest in peace, great sports personality covering soccer. And the audience really wasn't there. It's not ready for it yet. Mm-hmm. We've been doubling down on creator-led shows, athlete-led shows. I did not see in 2019 becoming as big as they are today. You had very few shows at that time. CJ McCollum was like the first one of the only ones doing it back then. So that's been a huge shift in the podcasting seas. Mm-hmm. But no, I think for the most part, we really believe that more dollars are coming here. That has played out. Advertising spend continues to rise. More and more brands have podcast specific agencies. They have their TV agency who helps them with the TV spend. Now they have a podcast agency that helps them specifically with the podcasting spend. It's becoming more of that marketing mix. If you think of it a pie chart, I think there's a bigger piece of pie allocated now. I didn't realize that a car brand spends $800 million a year on advertising. I didn't realize that hotel brand spends $475 million on advertising. That pie is now getting divided more into podcasting and creators and digital. And faster than we thought in 2019. So that was our original bet. that we could build a business that helps creators grow their revenue, but also is just catching their trend at the right time. Is that pie chart in the marketing mix is changing. So I think that's the trend we've been right on. I want to grow Blue Wire faster. Mm-hmm. We have a lot more things we want to accomplish, but I think we picked the right medium. I really believe in the space and where it's heading. Of course, it has its challenges, and we've been caught up in making mistakes. We used to have 30 full timers. We have less now, so we've made our fair share of mistakes. Narrative content, it was great to have, but it didn't really help us overall. So you live and you learn, but I really do believe in the industry and it's heading in the right direction.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to sort of see the evolution of monetizing podcasts and making sure that as agencies learn more about it. Like, do you guys want, or is it better for the agencies and advertisers and brands to think of a podcast budget, or is it really just becoming a lot more just sort of broad of like, this is our digital media budget, and that might be a YouTube ad, it might be podcasts, it might be what anything above the sun. Is it still kind of earmarked as podcast like spend, or is it really just becoming a little more evolved across just like digital creators and however it's being consumed?
That's the hardest part of the game, is it's different in every agency and every brand a little bit, so it makes it a little challenging. Some are straight up have a podcast budget, some have the digital creators influencer budget, some it's still under radio and audio for podcasting because that's what they consider it. They don't factor in all the video that's happening there yet, at least. So that makes it a little challenging for us to sell because we've got to understand, but it also gives us an advantage that we've been doing it 5 years and figuring out this puzzle. It makes it harder for someone to start selling ads right away. We understand the landscape, how thorny it is with how terminology and what different brands think. But I will say, to your question, more and more people are including the YouTube, are thinking of it as digital creators, even though it's like spread out all over the place of how it's categorized places. Most advertisers agree someone who's watching the YouTube full-length episode is a different person than who's listening, that no sane person's really going to consume the same episode twice, unless they're maybe 1 or 2% of the people. So they're like, okay, let's add those two together. So we've been able to tack on to our audience with YouTube for most brands, even if the terminology is different or how they buy is different, or they want to include some radio on this with different folks. So, but I think YouTube has been the big winner out of it all, like helping educate the advertisers. Hey, this is a different audience. It's helping us make more money. It's helping the podcasters make more money, just reaching more people. So them leaning into podcasting has been huge.
Totally. There are so many more topics I want to explore. One more thing just on this sort of the evolution of this business model, and I want to just touch briefly on a little bit of what headwinds or what trends you're sort of seeing in the ability to activate a partner with a podcast. I think we think of there's sort of the more pre-recorded ad reads, or that's just by some like omniscient voice. There's the host read where it feels a little more like maybe they pre-record it, or maybe it's also like built it's live reads where they're actually doing it on the show. Who knows where we're going with generative AI? Maybe there's also sponsored segments as well. Like this is the Coors Light 6-pack of questions or whatever. Like what's playing out? Where are we heading? And where's the value still yet to be sort of fully realized?
I'll start with the Coors Light example. Sponsorships are the number one thing that we're after, and luckily we're in sports because there's a huge sponsorship budgets for a lot of really big brands. You see the 3-point contest, you see the home run derby sponsorships. Like, we're trying to turn podcasts into those kind of properties where you're going to sponsor Cam Newton's podcast for 3, 6, 9 months, maybe even the full year, and you're going to get signage on the show. If it's a car brand, you're going to send him a car. He's going to do an ad read out of the car. He's going to interview some people inside the car. If it's a pizza brand, the doorbell rings, we're going to interrupt. Hey, we're going to be back here. We're going to bring the pizza live on the show. So, we're trying to do organic integrations with brands, make these sponsorships. That's our primo number one sale that we're trying to work on all the time. Second is just pure play impressions. A delivery service brand is still trying to be cool. They're still trying to create brand awareness. They still got to compete with the big dogs and they're willing to spend and sponsor a show and just have reach and make it more simple. There doesn't have to be all these custom elements. Like we love that too. It's simple, it's quick. There's a lot of studies that say podcast listeners and YouTube listeners remember the brand a lot more when it's a podcast ad versus a TV ad. There's just so many of them being thrown at you at one time.
Yeah. You're more focused.
So
when you're listening to
more focused, we're pitching there's less of them. The podcasters are getting better and better over the years of just being funny with these or creative. So trying to keep it fresh. So those are the two. And then third is just straight up audio too. And also the clips and the social media and like live events. We've done some parties with Miller Lite and some other brands too. Like, let's do a live podcast. Let's get some listeners together. That's another element. We go for brand awareness. That's the brands we love working with. We also work with performance agencies too, who are, hey, if you perform well, we're going to keep buying a shit ton of this stuff. If you don't perform well, it's over. But that's part of the mix. And there's programmatic too. So when you go to YouTube and you're watching and you don't pay for the premium like I do, I skip all the programmatic, but every 10, 15 minutes, YouTube will throw an ad in front of you. There's that for audio too. We work with Megaphone, Spotify. And so programmatic's kind of at the end of the waterfall if you think about our revenue as a stream. But that's still a 7-figure business for us per year. Just remnant inventory that's left over. Spotify that's what they're best at on the ad sales, is just kind of filling in the gaps for everyone, kind of how YouTube does, just this automated player. And just we can play those pre-recorded commercials on the Blue Wire. It's a lower CPM for us. That's why we're not focused on it.
Yeah.
So we make less money on that, but it helps us fill out more of our inventory, and we're not taking a zero on a commercial spot.
No, that was awesome. I feel like I just got schooled on the business of podcasting, and it's so great to hear. You touched on like sort of the live events and just sort of the extension of engaging with a community, because it is your podcast. If you're the best podcast, do form a community and people get to know. They have they inside jokes and esoteric things that happen on the podcast. They get to know the personalities, and I think I've talked on this podcast before in the past, even around where is the place for community of podcast listeners to congregate. You mentioned certainly engaging with the creators' accounts on Twitter. I'm going to call it Twitter, not X. Sorry, Elon. or even TikTok or Instagram or YouTube. I've heard talk about, well, maybe we have a Patreon page, or we have a Slack community, or we have a Discord community, or maybe now it's a WhatsApp community or a channel or an Instagram broadcast channel. What have you found? And certainly the live events, as you mentioned. How are you thinking about cultivating these communities and giving them opportunities to engage with the hosts and the creators as well as with each other?
Great question. Number one is still X and Instagram. Those are the obvious answers. 2, looking at platforms like Discord. A lot of podcast channels now have Slacks. Where are the hardcore listeners? What's best is they develop friendships with each other. Yeah. The hardcore listeners get into these rooms and they're starting new posts on what the podcasters are saying. Sometimes the podcasters will chime in, but it's not all in the host. The community interacts with each other. We work with a fun new sports startup called Watch Playback. They have developed a technology. As long as you have a cable authenticator login, you can watch games. You can watch regional games with your podcasters in the room. So I'll use our Warriors guys again, and others are doing this too. I think our Notre Dame podcast, Irish Breakdown, and others, they go live right after a game ends. They go YouTube live. I mentioned earlier the comments. They watch the game on playback, then they go YouTube live. Then they're answering questions in the Slack or the Discord channel afterwards. So it's night and day versus a radio host. You may call in and get on once a year, or you're going to call in and wait on hold. You get to, if you're a listener, interact very seamlessly. Mm-hmm. Not everyone's there doing this, but some of the best people realize I can't just have the social media and the show. There's got to be another outlet. Live shows, Cam Newton does a great job. He's done things in the past there. That's a good way to build. They're a little more expensive to pull off. We like a brand to be involved there. Those are a little more time intensive, so we prefer the digital platforms. But some of our podcasters still have a Patreon that they started 5 years ago, and they make six figures a year from their Patreon. It's grown that much. They've had that much loyalty over the years. They'll do bonus content on the Patreon. There's other apps too, Passes, some Patreon competitors that people are working with, but creators and the tools that they have, there's a lot at their disposal. It's best to go gradually, like hit some milestones with your audience, and then you don't want to launch all these from day one, but like it's a way to just keep the engagement rolling. There's people who truly, this is their favorite show.
Yeah.
You know, compared to a Netflix show, compared to shows we used to watch in the past, Friends, whatever, like they are hard. They're thinking about this show all the time for more than the games are being played for some of these folks, right? So why I want to not sell Blue Wire for a long time is I think there's a lot of value in this. This it's almost like oil, right? You're drilling so deep and getting the engagement. It's not top level surface, little quick stuff. It's true, like ride or die. Passion ship isn't a word. Like passion hood, is that a word? I don't know. Passion, yeah. Cool. I get fired up about that topic.
I mean, let's double click on that then. A few minutes left here with Kevin Jones, founder and CEO of Blue Wire Sports. Is that because all the engagement is going to happen? It's only going to that strength of community is only going to grow, and it is kind of by nature. It is fragmented. It's happening on Reddit, on Discord, on Patreon, on Twitter, on Instagram. Like, is there something where Blue Wire and its properties and its shows and its affiliates want to try to capture more of that community, or want to try to direct more of it, or want to try to even just track it so you guys can funnel them into the own platforms? Like, what is that like for you guys?
You hit the word tracking really well. So we are building our first piece of technology. We're never going to be a platform for audience, I don't think, for a while, maybe in the future. But right now we want to, what we're temporarily calling Blue Wire Home Base, where the podcaster can come in and we are measuring those metrics for them. How engaged is your Discord community? Here's your sales pipeline. Here's every brand we're talking to. Here's how your YouTube's trending month over month. We're trying to make it a home base or a command center where the podcaster logs in, and it's like this dashboard tool that we're in the final stages of completing here. And right now, you kind of have Megaphone, you have some of these tools, but it's taking that so much further. It's creating a baseball card for the podcaster that they can really understand. That's where we want to play. That's what we think's missing in the podcast technology space. I can't go start a Discord competitor. I'm not looking to raise a ton of money, and like that's a whole other business.
Right.
Maybe one day this technology will have that chatting function. People will bring it more in-house, but our first layer of this tech is just going to be this command center where the podcasters log in. You log into LinkedIn, you've got 3 or 4 notifications, different things going on. Try and gamify it so they get that red icon. They're like, oh, I have something going on here every day.
Yeah.
And try and get the podcasters so engaged in their content that they want to be doing more and giving them the insights that they need to do. Hey, by the way, we have this insight. 38% of your guys' Discords are just down on engagement. Maybe that's not a platform to use anymore. Maybe there's another. So we're trying to take all this data together, distill it, teach our podcasters what to do, show them their business underneath the hood. And we think that's going to help our valuation. That's going to help us just position the company a lot better. And it's going to keep podcasters with us long term and attract new ones who are like, wow, I really love this tool.
Yeah, I love hearing that. Yeah, I mean, even speaking as myself as a podcaster, like it's so fragmented for me to try to keep track of all the places people are listening, and let alone if people are talking about it or sharing it. And I know Spotify's trying to play around a little bit with like the social community aspect to it. I know that they recently are talking about launching like, I think, a show-based, sort of comments community along with the episodic ones they have now. So certainly a space that's very dynamic, and it's cool that you guys are building that command center and getting involved there. I want to touch briefly too on just the like what makes a good podcaster, and especially as you bring in like a Cam Newton or bring in some of these bigger personalities that maybe didn't build their career on being creators and being social savvy and all that. And I even talked to one podcaster that came on this podcast, Adam Tabachnik, who's now with Better, I believe. And he talked about like almost thinking in terms of like, this is gonna make a good clip if I answer this question in this way. Like, is there a a method to the madness of what makes a good podcast? Or like, sometimes I think dead air, or not dead air necessarily, but like empty chatter and just talking with the boys, talking with your friends can be a good thing. Sometimes you maybe want to just it's all kill or no filler. Like, what makes for a good podcaster, and how do you make sure that the athletes that come on the platform in particular, or the less experienced ones, are set up for success?
Yeah, for sure. Not everyone has the gift of the gab. Um, so I think we look for engaging personalities. We still look for that digital engagement because that just shows they're a social person. They
Yeah.
kind of know how to push buttons. Those two kind of go hand in hand. But I think we've all listened to a boring podcaster before and know like that ain't it. So for the most part at Blue Wire, we don't really launch new shows from scratch. We like to see that someone's already done it for a while, at least a few months, if not a few years, and they've gotten to this place where like they're ready to make more revenue. So most of we've launched a few from scratch because we can tell they're enthusiastic, we can tell they're a subject matter expert, we can see they have some audience that's engaged. So we look for some things, but to kind of de-risk ourselves, we're like, all right, who's already entrepreneurial? Who's already out there making it?
Yeah.
That way we're not launching a bunch of shows from zero that don't take off. It's like a rocket that doesn't launch, a firework that doesn't go off. It's like, hey, they've proven that they want to do this. They're already doing it. A lot of people come to us making no money or very little money at all. We know they're doing it because they love doing it, and the money's great to have. But anyone who kind of just wants to check, hey, I'm only launching the show if I get paid. Not to say we won't work with you, but we're less inclined, we're less enthusiastic. We'd like to see someone who's like, no, I'm building this because my audience wants this. I need to say this because I'm really smart at this topic or funny. And there's all different kinds of that. We mentioned earlier the X's and O's, the interviewers, the funny people, the straight up fans, the athletes. Like there's infinite amounts of genres there where you can shoot the shit with your boys or just be a solo host. Like the good news is the listeners are flexible in the format you deliver it in, as long as you're good at it and they like the topic.
Yeah, and it's tough too, as more and more athletes are going to be looking at podcasting as a way to extend their brand and continue to engage their audience while they're playing or even after. And you think about like the NIL carrot that a lot of college athletes are looking at too. And it's like, okay, like as an athlete, yes, you might have a little bit of a leg up because you have a built-in audience and some built-in notoriety compared to the enthusiastic fan that might be really good at building audience too. And it's almost like you have to be careful, I guess, for your guys' perspective of, yes, this person might take audience with them, but we need to make sure that they can actually do a podcast first and know what they're, and can actually use this medium appropriately, even compared to someone who is sort of a career creator. I guess they may know the platforms a little bit better.
Definitely. If you try and build a business like we did at Blue Wire, you're going to swing and miss too. But we've done a good job. Like a Chris Long several years ago, we could tell like he just loved doing this shit. Even though he made 40, 50 million playing in the NFL, he was bought into creating an audience. Get the same vibe from the Paul brothers, from Cam Newton, from J.R. Smith and his co-host Stephen Malbin, who have a great golf podcast, Par 3. We're now working with On3, the brand, the college football network. So like we look at other content networks too, but like, yeah, the individual creator is the backbone of our business. That's where most of our podcasters are. And a lot of them just love it, man. It's what they do. It's who they are. It's a part of their personality. It's such a reward to be able to have a platform like this. Like I keep saying, 15, 20 years ago, no one had platforms like this unless you were the beat reporter for this paper, if you were the one radio host in town. So the walls got broken down. If this was your dream, you can go make it happen. You can go become a radio or a TV host now. You can have your own show. So I think we're in the middle of a renaissance. It's a really fun era, time to be a part of media. And it's been fun to build the brand Blue Wire, working with big names, working with mid-sized people, and just helping them make their dream a reality as well as mine.
Love it. I would say that's a great place for us to cut off, Kevin, but I'm going to ask one more question because I have so many things I want to be able to pick your brain about. So I promise because we'll share we'll stat in just a moment. But I just want to touch briefly on these because I've suffered from myself. I mentioned before we started, I've been doing this podcast for 11 years now, and I have such a what I feel like is a very valuable bank of podcasts going back 11 years, and most of them are pretty evergreen. Yes, there's some. We don't talk about Google Plus anymore, but there's some things that go out of style. And in the sports world, you kind of have that mix as well, where some stuff is very much of the moment, like who's going to win this week and what happened in last night's game, and some stuff is more evergreen and timely. So when you think about sort of the long tail of potential content, potential podcasts, like how do you think about being able to monetize, activate, and make the most of these what ends up being these vast archives that build up over time?
Yeah, that's an area where I don't have a ton of experience, man. Most of the sports content, if you think about it, is not evergreen. It's not relevant the next week. The Yankees or Warriors are changing so quickly. We do have a couple shows. Chris Van Vliet, I keep mentioning Insight, his wrestling interview podcast. So I think that's where clips become massive. And I know you haven't done this for video, so that kind of puts you in a tougher position. But you've banked all these clips that are still valuable. The interview I did about the Yankees last year is that it has a few days to still be relevant, right? Talking about the losing streak. Oh, now they're on a winning streak. Got it?
Right.
So I think you're not doing this to make a ton of money. You're doing this to make connections, and it adds a lot more work for you. But you should consider keeping these video podcasts and clipping some of the best segments, and even just making a clips channel or just throwing it all out there, right?
Yeah.
But I get it. When I was a podcaster too, like it's hard enough just doing the audio editing, all that too. You're adding a whole nother work stream. It's not as simple. I mean, you could throw a camera on here and record it, but there's 2 editing streams, so it adds extra work. But the clips is where some of the clips that go viral on Twitter are old. Some of these podcast clips.
Right.
So obviously a lot of them are new too from new episodes, but
is there like
what helps you,
Kevin? Like, because I think about seeing whatever a Joe Rogan interview clip might go viral, and a couple of years later, or these interviews that are still relevant, or like all the Smoke podcasts with Steven Jackson and Matt Barnes, they do these interviews with old NBA players oftentimes. Like, is there a different business model potentially around something that is a little more evergreen versus something that's more of the moment, real time, knowing that most of your listeners or viewers will happen within this week, so it makes more sense for a brand to be able to activate for the season potentially?
Totally. I think it's a way to separate yourself without question. Some people do with guests. Some people do I think you're good at getting morsels of information out of people, right? Like you're good at peeling back the onion. I would say you're in that kind of category where there's a lot of different methods where the clips can actually be impactful. Yeah, some people do. They start a new season of stuff where maybe you're not releasing this next week because you're doing a podcasting series, and then you're doing a sales ticket executive series, right? You're kind of batching some of these together to catch more interest of someone like, hey, I'm doing a short 5-batch episode. And again, it's evergreen, so people can go back. So you can't kind of create that fear of missing out because they can go back, but that's a good thing too. I think batching is a good idea. There's a lot of, look at things outside of sports and see what people are doing. Even bigger, smaller, medium, people are doing smart things of just different types of gatekeeping and batching to keep people excited. But I know you don't even know, and a lot of podcasters, you're reaching out to people you don't know who's going to come on.
Right.
Having a bank of episodes being a couple weeks ahead of time, or we really tell people, if you're going to do this, try and release one a week, or for a business one every other week. At least do 25 episodes a year. So, you have valuable content, man. You have to put in a little bit more time, and for someone who's doing just audio and has an evergreen show, really think about clips, really think about how you can batch things together. That would be my quick advice.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it's interesting to think about the opposite side of the coin of knowing, as I alluded to earlier, knowing that because you guys live in the, talking about games, talking about stuff that's happening now, which free agent's going to sign where, next week or whatever, that that's a different and probably more valuable value prop for advertisers who are like, we want to talk about this product that we're releasing next week. Therefore, it makes more sense for us to go with that brand or that podcast, that property, because we know that the listeners are going to be listening this week, and that's where 90% of the consumer is going to happen.
100%. I know we're wrapping up here, but we know Cheez-Its, the brand's just making up a random example here. This is not true, but like using them as an example, they love college football consumers, and they love college football consumers in the South, and they love college football consumers who also drink craft beer. And like these brands are actually trying to target like legit people, not just males or not just 18-year-olds, right? It's like, who likes these snack crackers and they also like craft beer and they probably have this type of insurance? It's like these brands build audience profiles. So yeah, Neil's going to have a sales ticket segment coming up. There could be you can cater this. You can position this content to the advertisers. Hey, this is more for you, SAP or Monday.com. They're trying to work with them. Who are you looking for? How do we do some surveys to figure out what our audience actually likes on these different shows? Again, podcasting is about drilling deep. TV is surface level content. Yeah. You may have a second screen open. Podcasting, it's hard to be listening to a show and working, or some people can do it, but it's really hard. You're kind of just focused on that. We're drilling deeper and we're trying to get them more data on who's actually listening. That's the whole ecosystem. But we can keep going on for hours here.
Where are you guys at Blue Wire for that, Kevin? If I can, pick and pry a little bit, you have 13 million, downloads or listeners per month. How much do you know about them?
Not enough. A lot of second-party data. We know where you're listening, like what county you're listening in. We know rough age range within 10 years, which is helpful. We do know household income range as well. So we have cookies that we are podcasting or using. How websites used to use those too. Yep. But they're all second party data, not first party. So we're not pulling emails or whatnot. But now we're doing an extensive survey asking, do you play video games? Do you like craft beer or Bud Light? Do you drink liquor or wine? How often do you go to fast food restaurants? Like all these different types of questions where we can represent a nice audience profile. We hope to really start stepping up our game there in the next couple months, and that will be the future more Blue Wire. Right now we're just selling young males, like that's an easy sell. Right. But we want to be more contextual, go deeper, and that's kind of one of our next big challenges here.
Hell yeah, it seems like an exciting opportunity that it's just more and more value to uncover moving ahead. And I love hearing about it, love learning about it. I appreciate all the personal advice as well. I hope that was fun for listeners here. But we're going to have some fun with you coming up in our clip segment, Kevin. First episode of Shareable Stat coming up right now. Just fantastic stuff. Being able to pick the brain of Kevin Jones, a founder and CEO of Blue Wire. Tons of good information. And we're going to have some more good insight and information coming up with Kevin with our quick hitting question segment. But first episode's Shareable Stat. This is a Shareable Stat. Is around the Olympics. I basically just want an excuse to be able to talk about one of the most important athletes and one of the most influential athletes in these Olympics. Not an NBA player, not a WNBA player. It is not even a gymnast as well. It's Ilona Maher. I'm not even sure if I pronounced her name correctly. She is a USA rugby player. She went kind of viral in previous Olympics as well, but continues to just crush it right now. The stat I'm going to share with you is 106 million. That is, as of right now, as of this recording, the approximate number of likes that she has total on TikTok. Now, that is a true TikTok influencer. Many TikToks are multiple millions of likes and plays. She just does an incredible job and is a great example to be able to show really any athlete of any stature in any sport about what you can do when you take advantage of the opportunities that are put in front of you, like being able to compete at the Olympics, which she obviously worked very hard to be able to do, and showing a little bit of vulnerability, having a little bit of fun, and ultimately being a human. If you look at all of her content, it very much is like one of your friends posted it, but also she takes things very seriously as well when it comes to promoting ideas of positivity. Not ignoring trolls necessarily, but being able to talk about what they say and put it into terms that everyone can relate to and everyone can understand. She's just doing an incredible job of giving some access, showing you around the Olympic Village, talking about things that athletes are going through and talking about, thinking about things that average fans are asking her about, what it's like to be in a sport that is relatively rugged as a rugby player. Just doing a great job of being an ambassador as an athlete, something that every Olympic athlete in college, even in the pros as well, across any sport can really look to as an example of how you can develop your brand, be truly authentic, and not just spouting lip service to the word authentic, but being really authentic, being relatable, having fun, attacking serious topics, promoting positivity, not trying to be a troll necessarily. Just really good stuff from her. So check her out if you haven't been following her TikToks. Check her out, Ilona Maher. Again, that shareable stat is, as of this recording, 106 million lifetime likes on TikTok, and she's continuing to crush it. And USA Rugby, as of this recording, is doing quite well also in the Olympics. So we hope to see them continue to perform and potentially win that gold medal. So that's a shareable stat, but more importantly, stick around for some awesome, good stuff. More stuff coming from Kevin Jones of Blue Wire. I'm back on with Kevin Jones. He is founder and CEO of Blue Wire Sports. Kevin, you kicked ass in your interview segment. Are you now ready to make some clips with me?
Let's do it.
We'll try to get some viral clips, and maybe I'll create some video out of it somehow. All right, number one for you, Kevin. Tell me, you mentioned working at the TV and radio back in the day. Tell me the most memorable story or segment from your time at WZMB.
Oh, DMB, man. That was my first ever radio show in college at ECU. We did a charity basketball tournament promoting awareness for autism. That was a really fun thing that we did. We got the whole school involved. We did like a March Madness tournament, 3-on-3. So we had some really fun guests. I built some great connections out of that. And it was my first time ever being live on air. So learned so much. Learned that probably long term that there was going to be some challenges there. It was so hard, but that was fun. I got into a fight with the ECU head football coach. They lost 76-14. We had him on our program, and we were asking him hard questions. He got really mad at us, so I'll never forget that.
That's always a rite of passage if you are a journalist. I remember the first interview I did, where I got a no comment, and I was like, okay, I'm on the right track here. That's a good story. That's fun stuff. Number two, we're gonna go back to your time working with the Cleveland Browns. And tell me your favorite story that you worked on, and/or a favorite player to work with during your time there.
Wait, at which spot? Sorry, I missed it.
With the Cleveland Browns.
I went to Paul Kruger's wedding. That was really cool. He was a defensive end Pro Bowler back in the day. Also played for the Ravens. Dante Whitner, I'm still friends with and in great touch with. My mentor there is Nathan Zagura, who's still the radio broadcaster there, and just such a good dude. I met Johnny Manziel there. I met a lot of really cool people, Carlos Dansby, Brian Hartline. Wow. It was fun to be in the locker room there, fly on the team plane. That was definitely one of my favorite jobs.
That's awesome, and one of these days they will, get back to winning, and that fan base deserves it. But yeah, maybe not yet. Hopefully soon. Number three for you, Kevin. This is a good one. It's a tough one for you. Tell me the most important lesson you learned as an entrepreneur.
Oh man, you got another hour? No, I'm just kidding. I would say a couple quick hitters. It's all about the people. Like it can't be all about the money. Like you got to work with people who you want to work with, but they also got to care about what you're doing. You want to get everyone paid, but it's really hard. I didn't know there's gonna be this many no's and heartbreaks and like painful. There's so many highs and lows. Yeah. So you got to stay even keeled. You can't celebrate wins too hard. You can't take the losses too bad, because there's a low coming any week. You're going to lose a lot of sleep if you care. And I still do a little bit, but I've gotten a lot better there. Those are some of the biggest lessons. Care about the people, be ready for the wins and losses, and try and stay even keeled. That's right off the top of my head, but I could write a whole book on this.
Love to hear it. We'll have a part 2 interview with you one of these days, Kevin, and we'll go deep on building a business, because that's just I so much respect for anyone that's able to do it, especially someone as succeeding as you are. Number 4, this is going to be a fun one. Completely open-ended. You can answer however you want. What's Cam Newton like?
Bigger than you'd ever think. So I met him at the Super Bowl last year, and he's at least 6'7", very charismatic, my team's done a good job managing the partnership and working with his team directly. And that's why athletes love us too. Like we can just handle business and not take up too much of their time. But I bet him, really good guy. He could have played tight end in the NFL. He could have played defensive end. Like you're talking like just much bigger than you'd ever anticipate.
Yeah.
And I just love how he throws himself out there. And he cares about his network too. He's got all these great rappers coming on his show. Like he's branching more than out than just football. I love his football takes, but it's cool to see him be all about hip hop culture in Atlanta. And he's a really interesting person. He, to my knowledge, is the only former multi-time Pro Bowl quarterback podcasting right now. Podcasting for former football players has been more O-linemen like Jason Kelce or punters like Pat McAfee. So it's cool to see a superstar quarterback throw himself out there like this. And he's crushing it. And it's cool to have him as one of the faces of the franchise right now.
Hell yeah. Love hearing that. And he is legit good as a podcaster. He's great, a great talker, and just really good to hear that he's cool in person as well. All right, we're gonna go. I'm not gonna ask you to pick a favorite Blue Wire podcast, 'cause that's like picking children. We'll get down that path a little bit maybe later. But tell me your favorite non-sports podcast and or favorite non-Blue Wire podcast that you consumed or come across anytime in your life.
I listen to two semi-regularly. So My First Million by Sam Parr and
Sean Puri.
Sean Puri. That's a really good one where I've gotten ideas or heard entrepreneurs go through things or been inspired. I like how they talk about business. Guy Raz, How I Built That. I mentioned him at the very beginning of this podcast. He's one of the OGs, but he interviews entrepreneurs, how they built this. So I've listened to so many good episodes there. I could name 15 different Blue Wire ones, but I'll just stick to the business ones that I gravitate towards, which has been those two.
Hell yeah. Both are on my part of my podcast diet. So we are simpatico there for sure. All right. Next one. We're going to go to the Blue Wire route. Now tell me, this might be a tough one too to pick just one. So you can riff. The most memorable podcast segment or episode from a Blue Wire show.
Oh, geez. I mean, I'll shout out Chris Van Vliet. He's a wrestling podcaster. He's getting these amazing interviews with Undertaker, Cody Rhodes, the current people, the retired people, and just the community he's built has been insane. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but people broken news on their shows. People have really gone viral with some of their clips, but there's now one right now that's standing out to me. So I just want to shout out Chris because he continues to step up his game.
Hell yeah. That's a great one. And also sets up our next question really well. Because maybe it is professional wrestling, maybe not. Tell me the sport whose fans are most avid podcast listeners, speaking just in general or on average.
Football is our biggest category. Basketball is 2. College is 3. So like those are the big ones.
Yeah, and that would seem to check out with the avidity of those fan bases as well. All right, time for our food question, Kevin. We always ask your food question. I know you're not out there in Cali anymore, but so you can maybe tell me about the best meal to get where you are now. But tell me the best meal that you got in when you were back in California and where you got it.
Oh man, jeez, there was a hole in the wall Mexican place when I lived in Burbank, North Hollywood area. I can't even pronounce it right. Like El Michelado. It's a Mexican burrito stand attached to a car wash. You drive by it, you'd be like, "There's no way this is good." It is like literally the best Mexican food. Breakfast burritos, burrito bowls, whatever you want. That was walking distance from my house. LA is not very walkable, so that was one place that I got to go and walk to that I loved. Kobe is a really good Indian place in Santa Monica that I'll shout out. KOBI. We've had a lot of good meals there. It's like Indian, Polynesian type of food. Really, really good. LA, I miss a lot about the food, but a lot of good barbecue here in Houston that I like. There's not a huge barbecue scene in LA, so definitely been having a lot of brisket here in Houston.
Hell yeah, you'll get some good barbecue out there, and you may find some Tex-Mex somewhere around there as well, perhaps.
Oh yeah.
Come down the wire here with Kevin Jones of Blue Wire. Tell me, this might be a hard one, but I love this question. your favorite podcast name among the Blue Wire podcasts. You guys have some creative names among the Blue Wire show. So what's that name you're like, man, they nailed that, or we nailed that. That's awesome.
I'll choose Eurostep, which is a Milwaukee Bucks podcast. Euro is kind of a play on Greece, where Giannis is from. So Eurostep, hosted by Ty Windish, who's also a full-time employee with us. But our Milwaukee Bucks podcast, I always love the name of that show.
That's awesome. That's got to be just one of the more fun things you guys get to maybe work on with the host or the creators. Like, what do we name this thing, and just get creative as heck.
That's one of the things I love about podcasting, is seeing how creative the names are on our network or off. It's a true test of the creativity happening.
And we're speaking on my creatively named digital and social media sports podcast. I'll work on that for the next decade, maybe. Last one, Kevin, is tell me the current athlete without a podcast that you most want to see start one in the future with Blue Wire.
Oh, wow. George Kittle's really funny. Mm-hmm. Justin Tucker seems like he's really funny with the Baltimore Ravens. I think not a lot of quarterbacks are going to become podcasters, but these people who are like McAfee and Jason Kelce, they're playing other positions in the league. They're already really good at social media now. No, I mean, anyone who already starts the channel, that's why we love Cam Newton and the Paul brothers. They already started before we got there. So someone who started and needs help, that's who I love most. Like that shows that they're entrepreneurial. That's who we like.
There we go. If any if any professional athletes are listening out there, or athletes in general, Blue Wire's watching. Try to set yourself up for success. All right, Kevin, you kicked ass in your clip segment. Now your chance to take over the podcast and tell us your social media all-star to follow. Just tell us someone on any platform, who they are and why they're following.
Yeah, I'll just promote my own. It's Mr. _ Kevin Jones on X and Kevin Jones on LinkedIn. We're not as focused on our Blue Wire channel, so check our website out, bluewirepods.com. Our socials are more just reposts of our creators. So look through our portfolio, see you might like one of the team shows we have or one of the national personalities. And thanks so much, Neil, for having me. Really appreciated this time.
So much fun, man. Again, such admiration for what you guys have built there and are continuing to build at Blue Wire. And we look forward to listening to all the shows and continuing to watch you guys keep growing out there and doing this podcast game. Really cool stuff.
Appreciate you, dude. Thanks for having me.
Just fantastic being able to chat with Kevin Jones, founder and CEO of Blue Wire. Really appreciate his time and insight. Blue Wire is doing some incredible stuff. I listen to multiple of their podcasts on their network. Just the podcast space continues to grow, continues to evolve, continues to have more opportunities and a level playing field for others to get involved in as well. And who knows, I probably learned some stuff as well about how I could improve this podcast. But that'll do it for this episode of the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. Thanks again for listening. As always, I'm your host, Neil Horowitz. Hit me up on Twitter, NJH287, also on LinkedIn, where I post more content. Find the podcast, whatever podcast platform is your favorite, whether it's YouTube or Apple or Spotify, anywhere you want. And of course, visit the website, dsmsports.net, where you can find every episode as well as more content. Until next time, this is Neil Horowitz signing off for the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast.